It's time for This Week in Science and Education, the internet show that talks about all things health research and science related, new discoveries, new cures. How do we take this information and how do we make it relevant for the teachers and students in today's classroom? We're going to find out next. Stay tuned for This Week in Science and Education. This Week in Science and Education is brought to you by Sheridan Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning. At Sheridan, students shine brighter. Visit their website at SheridanShineBrighter.com. Hey everybody, it's time for This Week in Science and Education. This is episode 43, recorded Tuesday, May the 31st, 2011. Hey everybody, it's time for This Week in Science and Education. This is your host as normal, Kevin Cougler. Joining me as usual, Dr. Thomas Merritt from Laurentian University, and my good friend and colleague Colin Jago from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. But enough about them. Let's get right to our guest, because he's the reason we're here today. We're going to find out what is life like in the Antarctic and in the Arctic. Well, we've got Geoff Green with us here today. Geoff, thanks for taking the time to join us. I appreciate that. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here with you guys. Looking forward to it.
Geoff, I'm going to read this little bio on you because it does a really good job of explaining what Students on Ice is all about and you personally. So without further ado, here we go. Geoff Green is the founder, executive director, and expedition leader for Students on Ice. He's a Canadian adventurer, environmentalist, and educator. He's been leading expeditions and adventures from pole to pole for the last 15 years. Many notable organizations such as the Discovery Channel, World Wildlife Fund, National Audubon Society, and the Smithsonian Institute enlist Geoff to lead their groups into the world's most remote and exciting regions. Most recently, Geoff was recognized as one of 25 transformational Canadians. In 2005, he received a Certificate of Special Congressional Recognition from the U.S. Congress for his work with youth and the environment. He was also voted as one of Canada's top 40 under 40, an annual national prize event saluting Canada's top young leaders. In 2004, Outpost magazine shows Geoff as one of the top 5 Canadian explorers to watch. As we mentioned, Geoff is the founder and executive director of Students on Ice Expeditions. The program, now in its 10th year, has taken over 1,500 students, teachers, and scientists from around the world on expeditions to the Arctic and the Antarctic. The goal of this unique project is to give the world's youth a heightened understanding and respect for the planet's global ecosystem and the inspiration to protect it. As expedition leader, and this stat is fascinating, Geoff is a veteran of 76 Antarctic expeditions and 33 Arctic expeditions. Geoff, first question, how did this Students on Ice initiative come to be?
Well, it was just kind of a simple idea one day. I'd been leading expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctic, but not with students, with scientists and tourists and wacky adventurers that wanted to go surfing in Antarctica and all kinds of things like that. But I'd also been a school teacher, in fact pretty close to where Colin is today, just down the road from Brighton, Ontario. And one day, yeah, the two careers sort of collided, and I thought, imagine if we could bring students to these places at the beginning of their lives and how that would really potentially define their future, change their perspectives. So using the polar regions as a classroom, and it hadn't really been done before back in 1999. So we talked it up a little bit around Canada. Primarily, the first expedition we got off the ground was with 50 Canadian high school kids. I maxed out 7 or 8 credit cards, and away we went. And it proved the concept. The kids came back totally blown away and motivated and inspired. And we teamed up at the time with pretty much the core members of the Canadian Polar Commission. All their scientists were our staff on that first trip. And yeah, so it was just one of those ideas, and it grew from there.
Well, congratulations on your success so far. And speaking of Colin Jago, Colin, you know Geoff. There's a connection here. What is that connection?
There's a couple. Like he said, he's originally a hometown boy of the town I actually now live in, and I'm familiar with his sister. His sister actually works with my wife.
Oh, where are we going with this?
So works at the same school. But 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to actually go on an expedition with Geoff through Youth Science Canada, actually, and they took a dozen high school science students that had won science fairs and that sort of thing. So I was able to go and see firsthand what they do. And just one of the things, Geoff, that I think is probably important for people to know. Give us a day in the life of. Talk about like a typical day in an expedition. What exactly, like the kinds of things that you do during a day, because I think it's really important to understand what kids are actually doing when they're out there.
Yeah, good point. Well, they're ship-based expeditions, which is important to know. So we charter these large icebreaker, ice-class vessels, and those become our floating home, floating classroom, floating laboratory. And it's a mobile platform, so we sail down to Antarctica from Argentina, or in the case of the Arctic, we start in different locations. This summer in July, our expedition actually starts in Iceland. And every day we go to a different location. We'll go to wildlife sites, we'll go to international research bases, communities in the Arctic, of course, and get out and we'll go exploring. We'll go hiking on glaciers. We'll go zodiacking with whales or seals. We'll play with polar bears, so to speak. Not too close, but the kids are involved in a combination of hands-on research projects with the scientists on board. We also have lectures and workshops. So it's a packed program from morning till night, sometimes even before breakfast and after dinner. And we're trying to get the kids out there. It's a very hands-on approach. So really getting them to feel the place that they're in, to smell it, to touch it, to feel the power of nature, in particular in these polar regions. It's pretty overwhelming. And the students are 14 to 18 years old, although we now have a university credit course program, which is really phenomenal. We just did our second university trip in February. And the kids it's flora, fauna, history, culture, all the sciences. Environmental issues for sure have become a major focus, in particular because, as we know, the front lines of global warming are happening in the Arctic and Antarctic. But we're looking at global politics, Arctic Council issues, Antarctic Treaty, glaciology, and the list goes on. And it's somewhat determined by who we bring on each journey. We're really blessed because of the ship, we can bring a huge team. Like this summer, it's ridiculous. We think we have 65 students and 52 staff. And these staff keep on weaseling their way on. You know what scientists are like, eh? And
yeah, I've heard rumors.
But we're so amazing because it's not just scientists; it's other experts. We have musicians and artists, and all of them are part of the big team. So there's a formal education program, but then there's also the breakfast, lunch, dinner. There's out on deck mentoring one-on-one with the kids, and it's an amazing opportunity for students to get to know these exceptional people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of surprises as well. Every expedition never fails to amaze me. How new things constantly happen. It's like going to another planet when you go to the Antarctic and the Arctic, and we don't allow the kids to bring any technology, so there's no cell phones or MP3s. They disconnect from that, and that allows this process of them connecting to the natural world to happen in a remarkably quick period of time. You can almost see the transformation happening. It's really inspiring, and they come back just motivated and new ideas, and it manifests itself in so many ways.
I just thought Colin might jump in with a follow-up there. He looked like he was jumping. Go ahead, Colin.
I've got all kinds of them. No, I was just going to, and you sort of, as questions came to my mind, you sort of answered them, because it always struck me how amazing it was to have, working scientists on board, and kids elbow to elbow, in the lunchroom with someone who works on, Arctic plants or something like that, and just getting to talk to them at a level that you would never otherwise see. I just, it's a really neat thing. And I'm going to talk about, student transformation a little bit later on, because I think that's a key thing as well that you do, and the follow-up is very impressive. And there's a news article I just came across just today as I was looking, but we'll talk about it a little bit later, because I know Thomas wants to jump in here.
Well, I had a couple of questions after the "how do I get a ticket" question. It sounds amazing, and the video clips that Kevin put up there were fantastic. One of the things that we've talked about on this podcast is what scientists really are, as opposed to the scientist of a Frankenstein movie or a Far Side cartoon. So the opportunity that you have for these kids to interact with real scientists and not cartoon or movie scientists sounds pretty neat. Can you tell us something about what kind of scientists do you bring on, and how do you find a match with a particular scientist, a discipline, and somebody that's going to really thrive in this kind of environment? Because this isn't necessarily your standard scientific environment.
Yeah, it's a really, really excellent question. Well, the types of scientists, pretty much you name it, except geneticists. Try to stay away from them.
Yeah, they're a bad lot. Bad lot.
Good choice.
No, just kidding. Glaciologists, all the ones you'd kind of expect, botanists, oceanographers, marine biologists. We've really, it's one of the favorite parts of my job, I think, is getting to meet people and invite them to come on these journeys. And it's a lot about the chemistry and the relationship.
Yeah.
It's you kind of know the people that are going to be great with the students, and to some extent, when we started out, we went looking for people, but now it's kind of turned the tide a little, and we're really blessed that a lot of groups come to us through partnerships. Like with the Canadian Museum of Nature. We take at least one or two Canadian Museum of Nature scientists every year. This year we took Natalia Rybczynski, their paleobiologist, I guess she is, and Julian Starr, their botanist. But we also had last year their, Paul Hamilton. He specializes in sediments in lakes in the Arctic. But yeah, it's been all over the map, and there's no real formula to select who comes. It could be meeting you today on this podcast, and it goes from there. So and from all over the world. It's an international program, I should add. It started as a Canadian thing, and we are a foundation in both the U.S. and Canada. But we've had participants, staff, and students from over 44 countries now.
So let me follow up on that. One of the other things that we've talked quite a bit about on the podcast is partnerships, and what partnerships can bring to whatever it is, whether it's a collider, particle collider, or genomics facility, or in this case the program that you're running. So as this program has evolved over the last decade and a half, what do partnerships bring to what you can offer to the students and what you get out of it?
So it's all about partnerships, man. Like, I can't say enough about what partnerships mean. It's everything. Just this morning, I had a nice meeting with the ambassador of Iceland, and because we're going there this summer, and so we're forming a
breakfast this morning, actually.
But you name it, like whether it's partnerships with governments or with foundations, with institutions, with universities, with school boards, with I love partnerships. It's what makes the world go round, I think. It definitely is what makes Students on Ice work. And those partnerships some of them are financial, some of them are in kind, some are just a really cool group we love working with. But it's what it's all about. Partnerships and education, to me, are the core of what of what we're all about.
That's great.
Geoff,
Thank you.
Geoff, I'm wondering, you know, on a trip like this, I haven't been. Colin's been to the Arctic, so I'm sure he'll say that there are, you know, very many awe-inspiring moments throughout the course of the time. But
there's a few.
If you had to pick one on each expedition, so to the Arctic and to the Antarctic, if you had to pick one that comes up, or there's like that moment where the light bulb turns on in the student's head, is there one that kind of time and time again keeps coming back? It might be something you see, it might be just a moment where they, you know, just like you say, turn off technology and just realize, wow, I'm part of something bigger than what I am. Is there any moment like that, Geoff?
There's dozens of those moments. It's really hard to single out any particular one. The moment on the way to Antarctica, the moment you wake up in the Drake Passage and you're in open ocean, the most powerful ocean in the world, that's part of the journey that the kids are going through, leaving behind their comfort zone. And they're a little bit tired. Then they're seasick for 2 days. By the time they get to the Antarctic, they're quite broken down. It's almost like a cult without the drugs. And then Antarctica can build them back up again. It's really, it's by default part of the way the program works. But the first time they see a whale, the first time they see a polar bear, the first time they set foot either in the Antarctic or the Arctic, the first time they wander into an Inuit community, it's just one first after the other for everybody really on the journey. So the first time you see a wandering albatross, the biggest seabird in the world, go flying by, and the list goes on.
Mm.
Speaking of the wildlife, before we started the show, we were joking that you wouldn't see any fruit flies down there, Thomas. But Geoff, you said there are some flies down there that he might like to study. What were those flies again?
Well, there's lots of flies in the Arctic, that's for sure. But in the Antarctic, there's a flightless midget. It's the smallest land animal in Antarctica, and it survives in these little pools. And you can find them in most of the places that we go. So it shows you, like, people have these images of the Antarctic as this lifeless, cold, icy place. But in fact, that parts of it are certainly that way. But it's also home to some of the greatest concentrations of wildlife in the world. It's incredibly rich and diverse and beautiful. Complex. It's a cornerstone of our global ecosystem together with the Arctic. So the two polar regions are reflections of our planet, and I like to often say they're windows to the world. And the flightless midge is a big part of that, I guess.
Geoff, we're talking with Geoff Green, who's the founder of Students on Ice. Interesting discussion, fascinating discussion, really. Geoff, if I'm out there and I'm a student right now, I'm thinking, cut to the chase. Kevin, Thomas, Colin, how much is it, and how do I get a ticket? Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, the cost is quite substantial per student. The Antarctic this year is about $13,500, and the Arctic is $8,900. But the model that we've been using and building is that most of the students get funded by scholarships. So this summer, right now, there's 65 students signed up, and I think 58 of them are fully funded through partnerships. Scholarships and bursaries. So the students are selected through these different processes. And yeah, so there's no cost to the students. And ideally that's the model that we wanted to have. And you get a mixture. We're getting Aboriginal students from the Arctic. We're getting the Prince of Monaco's sponsoring 2 kids again this year, and he has a national environmental contest in Monaco to select those kids. The World Wildlife Fund of Canada is sponsoring 4 kids, and there's a scholarship program for that. And there's a number of others like that. So cost should never be any kind of obstacle if a student's interested to participate.
Colin, when you came back from this trip, you went over on a grant from the Youth Science Foundation. How did you take that information and then, kind of bring that into the classroom, with an educational focus? How did you use your experience?
You know what? It's pretty simple. When you've been to a place like that and you come back with amazing stories and photographs and videos, people will just want to hear about it. They just, Geoff knows people just. It's such an intriguing thing to people. They want to know about it. So I went to a number of classrooms in our board and did some talks and presentations with kids, and just shared some stories and shared kind of the philosophy of why go to these places, but then also the importance of learning about science and learning about environmental issues and protection and all of that stuff. So it's really sort of paying it forward in a way, because then those students get interested and they keep learning about it as well. So that was what I did. But it actually makes me think now, and I was mentioned earlier that we talk about some of the things that transpire after kids come back. And what prompted that, Geoff, I was looking on the website, and there's a young lady named Eden Full who was on the expedition that I was on, who's now at Yale, and she's just got this huge grant. Maybe talk about Eden in particular, but then some of the things that happen with the students when they come back and the kind of life paths that they go on following an expedition.
Well, yeah, Eden was just in the Globe and Mail last week. She was one of 3 Canadians selected for this $100,000 grant per student, and it's for this invention. She invented a solar panel that is very, very cheap to manufacture. If I understand it correctly, it works on different metals together, and the metals are able to move following the sun without any mechanical parts. And she's got her own foundation. Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, it's a tracking system for solar panels. It's a passive system. It just relies on the heat of the sun using bimetallic strips to move the panel, so rather than having motors on it. And just wanted to throw in that she was selected to go on Students on Ice because this was her science fair project. So this started way back when she was in high school as her science fair project, and now she's got this $100,000 grant to pursue it to its to wherever it can go.
Yeah, exactly. It shows you how you turn left instead of right, and one thing leads to another. But in her case, yeah, she's quite inspired about protecting the environment. The solar panel was a passion of hers, and now she's really on her way. And this summer she'll spend the whole summer in Silicon Valley looking for investors for her project. So there's stories like that. There's sort of the big spectacular success stories, and there's a lot of those from Rhodes scholarships right on down the line. But then you've also got the kids who have been inspired in a career direction. For some of the northern students, it's sort of an awakening to live a bit differently, to look at the Arctic differently, look at their home differently, maybe stop smoking. It never ceases to amaze me the way that it impacts kids, we had unfortunately you couldn't be there, Colin, but we had that alumni weekend a few weekends ago, and there were some kids there that were on the very first trip 11 years ago, and they said that they still think about that trip almost every day of their life, and it's affected almost everything that they've done.
Yeah.
Wow.
But this one girl from China, Sun Yi, she was 16 years old, and I don't know if she was on your trip or not, but she walked up to me on the beach on Baffin Island and said, "Geoff, I'm going to write a book about climate change in China." And I'm like, "That's a great idea, Sun Yi. You should really do that." And sure enough, a year later, this box lands at our office with 50 copies of her book, published by Chinese Science Press, and being distributed all over China. So these kids give such cause for hope, and for me, that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So if I could jump in for a second, when I'm not doing the genetics thing, I run a rowing program for people with disabilities. And recently I've been doing a lot of work with high schools and kids with autism and different abilities. So this idea of diversity is a big deal, and the idea of watching out for financial challenges is also a big deal. So in any of my rowing programs, I try to make sure that while they're going to cost something, cost isn't going to keep anybody from participating. So that idea that you've gone from primarily cost-driven to fellowship-driven, that's fantastic. Because people with disabilities are sort of near and dear to my heart with the rowing program, have you been able to open up this kind of program to students with disabilities? Have you had anybody in a chair that's had the opportunity to do this, or visually impaired, or somebody with non-typical abilities?
We have had some with not extreme disabilities, I guess, but we've been limited with the wheelchair accessibility because of the ships that we use.
Yeah.
If you've got some ideas, though, I'd love to explore those with you. We did try at one point. There was a boy I met in Toronto, paraplegic and amazing kid, and we tried to see if there was a way of adapting his wheelchair and make it work on the vessel. Yeah. If we had the right vessel, and one of our dreams is to build. Right now, we charter vessels, and they are what they are. But I'd love to, in the next 5 years, build the world's most environmentally advanced but really sophisticated expedition platform. We could share it with other organizations, but make it accessible and for the people you're talking about, because it would be amazing if we could offer that.
It is really neat, and there are always challenges when you work with people that have non-typical abilities. But as a professor, the highlight of teaching is watching the light bulbs go off, and you've got a student and it's often a one-on-one, and you're going through a concept that they've just missed in class, and then you watch them suddenly get it, and the student sits up taller and they brighten up like, holy crap, now I understand what you were trying to tell me, right? And it's awesome when that happens in a classroom. But one of the nice things for me with the coaching is working with kids that, for physical activity, perhaps their entire life they haven't been able to do that. And suddenly you've got a kid on a rowing machine, or you've got a kid out on the water, and not even a kid. I mean, we get adults on the water that have never been in a boat before, and watching them light up when they move that oar back and forth and realize that they just pushed the boat across the water. That's pretty neat, and these are people very often that haven't had that kind of opportunity. So listening to you talk about a high school kid seeing a polar bear for the first time, that's awesome. And if we can find a way to get kids with disabilities, people with disabilities who've had maybe even more limited experiences than some of the people you've typically been working with. Anyway, it's a kind of that's what jumped in my head. I mean, given my coaching background.
Thomas is going to get there one way or another, Geoff. I'm not sure
I am working the angle.
Sorry, Colin. Go ahead if you got something.
No, I was going to say that sort of. You mentioned your dream of what you think you should do, and that was actually one of my questions. Students on Ice just celebrated its 10th anniversary. What's next? Like where your thinking is heading? And I mean, building a ship is a pretty big thing. But is there anything else that you've got sort of in the near future that is maybe new or different, or what are you thinking?
Oh yeah, there's lots of things going on. We had this opportunity to buy a bankrupt private school.
Wow.
in the fall. It was a 600-acre private lake, beautiful thing, and it wasn't on our radar at all. But the opportunity emerged, and we came pretty close to. We didn't in the end acquire it, but it made us start thinking about this concept of polar school. And rather than having just expeditions, we could have year-round semesters. You'd have the Arctic semester, then you'd go to the Arctic, Antarctic semester, go to the Antarctic. So that's now kind of on the radar.
Cool.
A big project we've been working on for the last year is something called Polar House. It's an idea that's been around since the mid-'80s, when Dr. Fred Roots and Tom Simons from Trent University and a guy named Mark Gordon developed it, and kind of a center to celebrate the Canadian Arctic. And right now there just happens to be an empty building on Sussex Drive, 2 doors down from the Prime Minister's house. which is controlled by the NCC, and so we are pretty close actually to turning it into Canada's polar house.
Wow.
But we're just on the funding chase at the moment to happen.
Sure.
Canada, like on that note, we're a polar nation. We're to some extent our identity as Canadians is defined by the Arctic, whether we know it or not. And the Arctic is going to play a massive role in our domestic and foreign policies in the decades ahead.
Sure.
So something like Polar House would be a great thing to build bridges and raise awareness, celebrate the Arctic, and look to the future. So that's a project we're working on. And the alumni came up with all kinds of great ideas. Alumni expeditions was one they were quite keen on.
Yeah, go figure. I can't imagine how that would come up.
So there's a long list of things that we're going to try to build around the core programs that we run.
Very cool.
I've got another question for you, and I hope there's a really positive answer. I'm not from Sudbury. I'm actually from the States, and I moved up here 5 years ago.
No Americans allowed.
Sorry?
No Americans allowed. Sorry, strictly Canadian.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so living in the north, climate change is a big deal, and it's essentially always negative, and it's just sort of one dire story after another. You've been doing these expeditions for quite some time now with the students for the last decade. Is there any positive change that you've seen in that period of time? Something that you can look at and say, in this period of time, this is better. Something we're doing, something you're doing, that you can take away as hope for our future as a planet or as a people?
Well, I haven't seen anything that's better planet, I don't think, through climate change. There certainly are some people, including Northerners, Inuit, that see some benefits to the opening up of mining, oil and gas development. It's going to bring billions of dollars into the north, lots of jobs. So I think some people are looking at some of, I guess you could call it, the positive outcomes of these changes. The fishery, the Arctic fishery is going to be opening up, and yeah, it's going to make a lot of people money. But, well, that's where you stand, I guess. If it's done sustainably, I think we have to accept that some of these things are going to happen. They already are happening. The huge mine, the iron ore mine that you've probably read about, where they're going to be building a train across Baffin Island and having year-round shipping in and out of Hudson Strait and the Fox Basin. These things are going to fundamentally change the nature of the Arctic, I think. So we're at a point where we can take the position that, okay, if this is happening, let's do it in the most environmentally sustainable way and all that stuff. Yeah. So those things are being talked about. The Inuit are hopefully going to play a pretty significant role at the table. But at the end of the day, I would say none of this bodes really well for the planet.
But couldn't we say that those are the 2 points that you've made there are improvements, in that 20 years ago, if we were opening up iron ore mining, I don't think we would have had the same focus on trying to make sure, at least making the attempt, to make sure it was done correctly or as environmentally friendly as possible. And hopefully in the last couple of decades we've gotten better at including indigenous peoples in decisions that are being made and thinking of environmental issues. I know in Sudbury. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope it's the classic. Do we learn from our mistakes, and will we let what happened in the Gulf happen in the Arctic? And I am not on top of that issue 100%, but I don't think all the safeguards are being talked about for future drilling in the Arctic. It may not be too late for that, but yeah, for sure, I think we will do things better. But it's a Pandora's box. Opening up the Northwest Passage for shipping, opening up for drilling and fishing. The Northwest Passage, if it becomes a through route, a transit for the Arctic, boy, the list of issues are going to be enormous.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I've definitely seen the impacts though firsthand, more in the Arctic than the Antarctic. Last summer on our Arctic expedition, it was the first time in 20 years that I've been going up to the Arctic I didn't see any sea ice at all.
Yeah.
We were downloading ice charts to find ice to show the students,
Yeah.
instead of avoid the ice. It's remarkable how the speed at which it's happening.
Yeah, and remarkable is another way to say very frightening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Geoff Green is the founder, executive director, and expedition leader for Students on Ice. Jeff, we've come to the end of the time allocated for our show today, but I'd like you to leave the listeners, and especially the students out there, with one last word, and that word is, if you were to describe a student's experience for Students on Ice, can you sum it up in one word for us?
That's a good word.
No, I don't think I can. I don't know if I can, actually. Numinous.
All right, I'm going to write that down and go back and look it up.
Yeah, I'm Googling it right now. Geoff Green, everybody, from Students on Ice. Jeff, thanks for taking the time to join us today. On behalf of Thomas Merritt from Laurentian University and Colin Jago from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, this is Kevin Cougler, a virtual researcher on call, saying thanks very much for tuning in to an exciting episode of This Week in Science and Education. See you again, same time next week, everybody. Take care now.
Thanks a lot, guys. That was a lot of fun.